While black and white Tulsa grew and prospered, so did the influence of the Knights of the Invisible Empire of the Ku Klux Klan. Abetted by D.W. Griffin's 1915 epic movie, Birth of a Nation, the Klan membership swelled nationwide. Griffin's movie was based on the novel The Klansman and is seen today as a gross distortion of the post-Civil War Reconstruction era in the United States. Thousands of Americans joined the Klan, and every major American city had a clavern or a Klan hall. Urban historian David Breed says Tulsa was no exception.
In Tulsa, the Klan was an interesting group. It was not the kind of vicious, vigilante-type organization that we often associate it with. It was more a civic group. In fact, I understand that when it initially listed itself in the Tulsa Telephone Directory back in the early 20s, the listing was under the name the Tulsa Benevolent Association.
Noted black historian John Hope Franklin.
But let's not think that this Klan is a little social club or tea party. This Klan is riding herd over the political and social scene, and it's dictating what ought to happen.
Racial tensions began to mount as the Klan followed its call to combat the Jews and Catholics and to keep blacks in their place. The country was distracted briefly in 1917 when America entered World War I. For the first time, Uncle Sam tapped his Negro nephews on the shoulder and asked for volunteers, and blacks responded to their country's call by the thousands.
We really went there joyfully to do a job. And we sang, we won't come back until it's over there, over there, over there. You know, no way you know that song. Send the word, do beware. The Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. Drum, drum, drumming everywhere. So prepare, so prepare. Say a friend, say a prayer. We'll be over, we're coming over. But we won't come back till it's over there. And we really went there. And we were glad to go over there and get it done.
When blacks went overseas to fight, they found that they were not part of the American forces, but part of the French army, which only added to racial tensions on their return.
There were all kinds of rumors, as you can imagine, that when they were in France, they were treated as equals. They went out with French girls and all the rest of it. And that added to the apprehension on the part of whites in this country.
When the black doughboys returned from France, they found that nothing had changed. The freedoms they had experienced in the military overseas did not transfer to America. Cities like Chicago, Omaha, and Washington were torn by bloody riots as blacks fought for their share of freedom, equality, and justice, and whites fought to keep them in their place. The violent summer of 1919 became known as the Red Summer.
The 1919 is a bad year from any angle so far as blacks were concerned. And it was a bad year so far as this country was concerned. For it did, without a doubt, make a lie out of what the United States claimed that it stood for in 1917 and 1918 during the war in Europe.
Lynch law and mob violence were the orders of the day, and in January of 1920, Oklahoma City's Black Dispatch looked back on 1919 with horror. Blacks were shot, hung, and burned at the stake for minor infractions or for no reason at all. Many died in their military uniforms, and in several documented cases were taken out of presumably safe jails and lynched under the watchful eye of the local sheriff. A black newspaper editor at the time felt compelled to write,
"Why do they lynch Negroes anyhow? With a white judge, a white jury, white public sentiment, white officers of the law, it's just as impossible for a Negro to escape a white man's vengeance, so why not give him the semblance of a trial?"
Weren't the exclusive victims of the lynch mobs. In July of 1920, a young white man named Roy Belton, accused of killing a cab driver, was taken from the Tulsa County Jail and lynched. According to eyewitnesses, the Tulsa Police Department directed traffic at the scene.
It was a bitter lesson that would be remembered by Tulsa blacks a year later.
Spring had already melted into hot, sticky Oklahoma summer by that May 30th of 1921, when a 19-year-old Negro bootblack by the name of Dick Rowland entered the Drexel building. Rowland got on an elevator operated by a 17-year-old white divorcee named Sarah Page. Accounts differ, but as best we can tell, Rowland stumbled getting on the elevator. He brushed against Mrs. Page. She screamed. A clerk from the nearby Renberg's department store ran to her aid. Dick Rowland fled. Mrs. Page told the clerk that Rowland had attempted to attack her. An incredible charge when you consider the situation. A black man attacking a white woman in an elevator in the middle of one of Tulsa's busiest office buildings. Rowland was arrested the next day on Greenwood Avenue.
At 3:15 that Tuesday afternoon, May 31st, the Tulsa Tribune hit the streets. This article was a blatantly fictionalized account of the alleged attack which accused Rowland of tearing Sarah Page's clothes and scratching her face and hands. But many white and black Tulsans remember a second article in the Tribune that day.
The Tribune had come out and told about the incident of Dick Rowland, the shoeshine boy, in the elevator of the Drexel building. And he said, it looks as if there will be a lynching tonight.
To date, no copies of the article headlined "To Lynch Negro Tonight" have been found. All the microfilmed copies of the Tulsa Tribune have been purged, even the copy in the State Historical Society. This is the first evidence of what would later be called the conspiracy of silence that surrounds the Tulsa race riot. Whatever the newspaper articles said, they inflamed Tulsa whites, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon there was already lynch talk on the streets of Tulsa, and the sickening downward spiral to the riot had begun. Law officers were apprehensive about the talk of lynching, so they moved Dick Rowland from the city to the county jail where he would be safer. By 7 o'clock that evening, their decision had been justified. A crowd of some 300 angry whites began to gather at the courthouse. Sheriff Willard McCullough and 6 guards were in the jail when the police chief, John Gustafson, arrived at 7:30.
Meanwhile, back on Greenwood, there was growing concern for Dick Rowland's safety. Angry crowds gathered on street corners, and Robert Fairchild was among them.
They were talking about what all was going on and said, ain't gonna be no lynching tonight. If there is a lynching, we're going to be right in the middle of it.